Here we have foot inversion on my left side. As you see, I'm just stepping the inside of the foot on top of the outside of the kettlebell. And what I'm going to do after that is start pressing the inside of the foot down into the side of the kettlebell, as you see here. I'm going to hold this position passively for about 2 minutes, and then I'm going to start pressing the inside of the foot into the kettlebell from 0 to 100%. And then I'm going to go into the rails contraction, which would be trying to lift the inside of the foot off and away from the sideline kettlebell. So this would be foot inversion, paddles and rails. And then here we have foot eversion, paddles and rails. We have the outside of the foot on top of the kettle, and we are pushing and passively holding this position here. And then we're going to start pressing the outside of the foot into the kettle as our paddles contraction, and then our rails contraction would be try to push away from the kettle or pull away from the kettle and try to lift up off the kettle, and that would be foot eversion, paddles and rails. And these would be two foot strengthening mobility drills that you can try. You can use the bottom of the kettlebell to extend your toes, as you see here. I like to disassociate the big toe from the small toes when I do this, so I'll do the big toe separately than the small toes, and I'll practice passively holding, and then my paddles contraction will be pushing the toes into the kettle, and my rails contraction will be pulling away from the kettle. And there's many different variations you can do here. As you see, I can get both of my toes at the same time, or I can just get the small toes, and I can do one toe at a time as well, and I can do paddles and rails in all these positions. Definitely trying to focus more on the big toe, especially for me on my left side, as I have some issues there, so I'm always trying to improve the extension of the big toe. Here I'm using the crest of the kettle to separate the toes. I'm getting some good tactile feedback in between the toes and good separation here. This is just a passive stretch. Here we have plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So we have plantar and dorsiflexion with the kettle as a static or as a kinetic stretch here, and just strengthening the end range of dorsiflexion. I like pressing the bottom of my feet on the round part of the kettle. I believe it helps me to separate my toes, and it gives me a lot of tactile feedback, almost like a massage on the bottom of my feet. It also gives me a lot of feedback regarding the actual feeling of the bottom of my foot. I like to try to kind of squeeze the kettle with my toes and try to do some toe cars. It's really hard to keep the big toe down as you're trying to grasp the kettle, so I like to kind of play around with some controlled articular rotations on top of the rounded part of the kettle. Usually it feels really good on the bottom of the foot, and it's a really good way to kind of just wake up the toes and the ankle. Here I'm in combat base, holding on to 2 dowels. My right knee is going over my right toe. I am in dorsiflexion on the right side, and I'm holding this passively for about a couple minutes, and then I'm going to start pressing the bottom of my foot into the ground, and then start pulling the bottom of my foot up toward the shin. As you see here, I'm beginning to rock and just make it a kind of a kinetic stretch, and just kind of moving through this range of motion, just seeing how that feels. And this is going to be really important for dorsiflexion of the ankle. As you see, I'm starting it on the other side, get into my combat stance, and just make sure you feel comfortable. If you need to sit on a box or a medicine ball because of the back foot, you can always do that, or you can just prop your front foot onto a box. Here I'm just rocking back and forth as a kinetic stretch in combat stance. Here I'm kneeling with my toes in extension and my ankles in plantar flexion. And what I'm going to do here is begin to press the tops of my toes into the ground, and then I'm going to try to squeeze or flex my toes toward my glutes. I'm going to do that a couple times, about 3 seconds each. After I do that, I'm just going to kind of do some kinetic stretches through the toes in the knees here and just trying to see how that feels in the ankles and feet. And then I'm going to sit deep into my squat. And as I sit deep into my squat, I'm going to begin trying to lift my foot over the dowel. So what I'm going to be doing here is some active external and internal tibial rotation. So I'm basically doing some hovers in a squat position over the dowels. And you'll notice that it takes a lot of effort and concentration to stimulate all the tissue in the front of the shin and all the active tissues that allow you to do this position. And after that, we'll do some kinetic stretching, just going back to that sissy squat, back and forth, just kind of moving through that range. We'll begin to do some controlled articular rotations on top of the kettlebell of our ankle. That's going to feel real good after all that ankle work. After this, what we'll do is begin to do some controlled articular rotations of the knee and assess where the knee is at. And after we touch on the knee, we'll get into the toes, going back to the toes and moving them through their extension and flexion phases, whether it's just the big toe or all the small toes at the same time, trying to lift them up individually. After that, we'll begin to get into external and internal tibial rotation. So here we're in internal rotation of the tibia, and I'm holding the outside of my foot and the outside of my forearm, holding this position passively, and notice that I'm doing a kinetic stretch as I'm trying to move in and out of that range. I really like to put a lot of tactile feedback into that ankle, into that knee, into that shin, as it really helps me to irradiate and control my intensities in this stretch. As you see here, I'm beginning to kind of intensify some controlled articular rotations of the ankle and doing some kinetic stretching of the tibia, and also pals and rails in this position as well.